All right, so it is 5:30 p.m. and I would like to call this meeting to order. This is an audit entrance conference. So Dr. Watts, we go ahead and begin.
Absolutely. Thank you, President Daniels, members of the board, staff, team, and our entrance audit team as well. We appreciate your being here and know that this work certainly supports our mission of successfully preparing all students for their futures. And the reality is we know that resources are a huge part of that work. And we review certainly our budget on a consistent basis. And we also know that our financial resources are much more like an investment portfolio, how we allocate our resources for the good and the success of our students, as well as the staff who serve them. So thank you for the information you'll be sharing with us today. And I will turn it over to our team. Thank you, Dr. Harmon, and to Mr. Rarick for your work with our budget and finance thus far. So, team, we'll take it away.
Perfect. Well, Diana, do you want to go ahead and present your PowerPoint?
Yes, I will do that right now.
So that's up. I will start. You might want to unplug your extra screen. We're seeing the next slide, but that's okay. We can do it too. That way we can plan ahead. So perfect. So thank you all for having this entrance conference in an open public meeting. We think that's absolutely fantastic. One thing we always say when we have these entrance conferences, let alone an open public meeting, is one of the first things we do when we come into an audit is we look at the control environment, which mainly consists of the tone at the top. So when we get involvement from the governing body and from management right off the bat in one of these entrance conferences, it allows us to check that box of the tone at the top, that the governing body does care about our audit results and that they do participate in our audit. And it just gives us that warm, fuzzy feeling to start off the audit with. So we appreciate you having us tonight. I think it's fantastic. It's an open public meeting. My name is Alex Barrett. I'm the audit manager for Team South King County. Been with the team now for 2 years. This is my second time go around with Kent School District. I've been with the office though for a little over 8 years. Started out in the Olympic Peninsula region and then North King County region, and now I'm in the South King County region. With me is Evans Anglin. He's the assistant supervisor this year on the audit. It's his second year also on the audit. And then Diana, I will Kovalovich. I'm actually attempting to pronounce her name, and I know it's not even close, Diana. I apologize. But she is the auditor in charge, and it's her second time around with the school district. So a big emphasis when I became the audit manager on this team was to get the same auditors coming back year in and year out. I believe it's very important for us to do that because then we can develop relationships with the district where people feel comfortable asking questions and are just more forthcoming with information and discussing since they know us so well. So again, hopefully this will be, at least Diana, the same team you'll see next year. This is Evans's last year on the audit as he's retiring in June, but hopefully we'll have Diana back next year. So for the next slide, the different type of audit results and the audits that matter. So we'd like to just point out the different type of audit reports that we issue, with accountability, financial, and federal being the most that we issue, hence why they're a different color and a little bit bigger than the other ones. We do accountability audits, of course, more than most because even the smallest entities across the state get accountability audits. Then we do financial, and usually about 50% of the time paired with that financial, we also do a federal report, which is the case with Kent School District. We always do that accountability, financial, and federal report every year. Some of the other reports that we issue, though, is performance audits, cybersecurity audits, citizen hotlines. If you're ever curious about some of the services we have or other reports we can issue, just let us know. Happy to talk about it. Also, as you may know, doing things a little differently this year with the pandemic, doing a PowerPoint rather than going over all those papers that we send you and having to funnel through all those pages. If you ever have questions, though, on all of those papers that we sent you, because we did send those to you, please feel free to ask. If you don't get a chance tonight, I can answer those throughout the audit or at the exit conference or even after the exit conference during the year. I can answer any of those questions. We're going to touch on all those papers at a very high level in this PowerPoint, but we're not going to go into depth in those papers. So if you ever have questions, let us know. And as I mentioned, we're doing an accountability, financial, and federal audit this year, of course, for Kent School District, covering the 2020 school year. And to go over the scope, we'll start with accountability. I will pass it over to Diana if we don't have any questions so far. Perfect. Take it away, Diana.
Alrighty. So the first audit that we will be performing is the accountability audit. And like Alex has mentioned, the scope is September 1, 2019 through August 31, 2020. We will be examining the management, use, and safeguarding of public resources to ensure there's protection from misuse and misappropriation. In addition, we will also evaluate whether there is reasonable assurance for adherence to applicable state laws, regulations, and policies and procedures. For this specific type of audit, we utilize a risk-based approach in selecting areas for audit. And as part of this process, we have completed a number of audit planning steps that included things like conducting risk assessments with key members of the district, reviewing minutes of the governing body. We also conducted analytical procedures, and we also assessed areas of common risk for districts across the state. And based on these planning procedures that we have performed, we have identified the following areas for inclusion in our audit. They are self-insurance for health and welfare, unemployment and workers' compensation. We've also selected professional learning. We've also selected local revenue subfund, basic enrollment, supplemental contracts, compliance with public works projects, change orders, and last but not least, financial condition. Most of these areas have been selected in our accountability audit because they have been identified for inclusion in most of our audits this year, which we refer to as statewide theme. And of course, at the conclusion of our audit, we will publish a report showing the results of our review, including the areas examined. Any questions before we move on into the financial statement audit? Great.
I have a brief question.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could enlighten me as to how do you determine which areas, is there a state thing that you go every year by which areas you cover? Assuming this is really my first official kind of after a year going through being a board member. If you could help me with that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Diana, I'll take this one. It's fine. So it's a whole mixture of different things how we come about those. But specifically this year, I can go through each one. So self-insurance, that's required by RCW to be audited every 2 years. So any entity across the state that takes public dollars, if they're self-insured for any risks, then we have to review that to make sure there's a certain amount of funds set aside and that there's policies and procedures in place. So expect to see self-insurance every 2 years like clockwork for Kent School District.
Okay.
Professional learning, local revenue subfund, these are statewide themes. These are new requirements that were instituted last school year by OSPI through the new RCW, through the McCleary decision. This was a result of that. So last year was the first year we looked at it. And usually when the first year you're looking at something, you go very high level. This will be our second year, so we're going to dig a little bit more into the weeds on this one, but they're still clarifying the rules around these areas OSPI is. So we're kind of catching it as you are, trying to catch up with the rules as they come out. So those were statewide themes that we're auditing at every school district across the state this year that has an accountability audit. Basic enrollment, we have a specific schools team. They typically do, they do a lot of special education audits. They do alternative learning typically, and they do the tribal schools. They also often help out the local teams with some of the apportionment areas. So this year they selected themselves through a risk assessment which audits, and I think Kent School District was flagged just because of the amount of enrollment and it hadn't been looked at for a while. So they flagged Kent School District to review that. So actually our schools team is going to do that on our behalf. They'll still charge the budget, but they're much more familiar with apportionment areas. So they're going to do that for us down in Olympia, and that will be rather quick. So that's why that one was selected. Supplemental contracts, another one of those statewide themes. It kind of goes in with professional learning. Part of professional learning was a supplemental contract. So there's other supplemental contracts for certified teachers that we're looking at just to make sure that's well documented and they're getting paid in accordance with those supplemental contracts. So another statewide theme. Now, compliance with public works projects. We've been asked in the past to look at procurement quite often here, and we saw that Clark Newber also looked at procurement here quite a bit, quite extensively. So we saw that during our planning, but we noticed one thing that hadn't been maybe looked at as recently was change orders. And we noticed there was a significantly large project this year that had some pretty big change orders on it. So we thought best let's look at that this year and just make sure there's good policies and procedures in place. So that was a Kent School District specific risk that we just identified. Not saying that we saw anything that looked like it could be wrong. We just noticed in our minutes that there were some significant change orders. And so we're like, oh, we haven't looked at that for a while. So let's look at that in keeping with looking at procurement or trying to look at some portion of procurement for at least one more year being this year. And then financial condition. I do that as part of every entity, not even just schools. Every entity we audit, we look at financial condition. It's part of our financial statement audit. We have to alert people if we don't think the district can operate as a going concern. So part of that is just doing some analysis to make sure that the school district can continue to operate as a going concern, which I know doesn't sound going concern. The word concern throws you off. You want to be known as a going concern, in case that's confusing. So we do that for all of the entities that we audit. We look at that just because we feel it's very important to do. So any follow-up on those areas?
That's very thankful. That helps me a lot. I'm very appreciative. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, this year was kind of unique in that we were very dictated on what we were going to look at this year. So it's not always that way. But this year, because of the pandemic, I'm not surprised. Even all the different types of entities we audit, there's very specific statewide themes this year. And I think a lot of it's a result of the pandemic and just operating remotely and things of that sort.
So my question is some more
Yes.
on the supplemental contract. So what types of supplemental contracts are you talking about?
Payment to certified staff.
Okay, so it's not like, because we have a lot of contractors that come in through like Blazerworks and other entities that provide certified staff through that. And so would that be the supplemental contract you're talking about?
I don't believe so. We're more talking about certified, so teachers basically, and their supplemental contracts for things like professional learning days. Maybe there might be a coach for a sport or something and they get a supplemental for that. So that's more the supplemental contracts we're looking at.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions? And if they come up, we can always come back to this area too. I know we throw a lot of information at you at once. So if you have something else comes to mind, we can definitely backtrack. That's not a problem at all. So go for it, Diana.
So the next audit that we will be conducting is the financial statement audit. Same audit scope as the accountability audit. And the objective of financial statement audit is to issue an opinion as to whether the financial statements presented for audit are fairly stated and materially correct. It is also important to note that our audits are conducted in accordance with government auditing standards. Those standards require that we also take a look at the district's internal controls or the process that it goes through to prepare the financial statements. Should we become aware of any issues with your process that could or did allow misstatements to occur, we are required to alert you to this matter during our audit. Lastly, we will also remain alert to any identified instances of non-compliance that could impact the information presented in the financial statements. And we will also bring this to your attention if identified. At the end of our engagement, we will be also issuing a financial statement audit report, which will be in accordance with the regulatory basis of accounting. This report will detail the opinion being issued, the results of our consideration of the district's internal controls and compliance, as well as a full set of audited financial statements. The next audit that we will be performing is the federal grant compliance audit. Same audit scope as the accountability and the financial statement audit. This audit is required by the federal law when a local government spends $750,000 or more annually in federal financial assistance. We will provide an opinion on compliance with federal requirements that could have a direct and material effect on your major programs, federal programs. The objective of this audit is to determine whether the district materially complied with the requirements of receiving federal funding. Upon completion of this audit, we will also be issuing an opinion on the district's compliance with federal grant requirements. And a modified opinion is what you want to receive. And it provides assurance that the funds were expended in accordance with their intended purpose and that all requirements have been followed. We also want you to be aware that these results will be published in a combined report with our financial statement audit. And additionally, it is also important to note that our audits are conducted in accordance with uniform guidance. Those standards require that we gain an understanding of the district's internal controls or the process that it goes through to ensure federal grant requirements are followed. And once again, should we identify a weakness or a concern with that process that could or did result in significant noncompliance, we will bring those to your attention. On the next slide, you will note that we select enough federal grant programs for audit to satisfy coverage requirements, which are set by the federal guidelines. And in assessing this requirement, we've identified the following specific programs for inclusion in our audit. The two programs that we have selected for testing are Title I, grants to local educational agencies, with total federal expenditures being $7,668,119. We've also selected the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund program for testing, which totaled $4,887,653. And these costs amount to about 43% of total federal expenditures for the 2019-2020 school year. And lastly, we just want you to know that our report is required to be submitted along with the data collection form to the Federal Clearinghouse following our audit. Any questions on the financial or the single audit before we go forward?
I'll just add at this point, Ben, it doesn't sound like they've extended the Federal Audit Clearinghouse deadline yet, but of course I will alert you if we hear of any news. But so far I don't anticipate not meeting a May deadline at this point. We're moving along quite well. So yep.
I have one quick question again, and perhaps you can enlighten me. Do you show a curve from year to year if it's like steadily going along, that everything was basically okay in, say, 2017, 2018, and then 2019, 2020? Do you do any graphs for comparison overall, or is that just something that isn't included?
We definitely, we don't have like a document that specifically does that, but past audits definitely have a difference on how we audit this year. Case in point, for federal audits, you'll notice we did 43% of the coverage. Then the reason why we have to do over 40% is because the district received a federal finding a few years ago, 2 years ago. So for 2 years, you're considered no longer low risk in the eyes of the federal government, OMB specifically. But however, once you go 2 years, so last year was a clean federal audit and financial audit. If you have a clean audit this year as well, i.e. no findings, material weakness findings specifically, you'll go back down to 20%, which they consider low risk. And so a lot of times that will make it so we get to audit less programs. Actually, this year was kind of nice. Last year, we had to audit 3 programs at Kent School District. There's a lot of things that go into how we select which programs we have to audit, all dictated by OMB. This year, we only had to do 2 federal programs. So the audit costs, I think if I remember right, I think it's about $8,000 less than what we quoted last year. As a result, since we only had to do 2 programs. So that's one way that we do it. Another way is we always have an accountability history matrix. So we keep track of all the areas that we audit over a period of time. Usually about 5 years is what I consider relevant. And then we flag what we call internal significant systems that we haven't looked at for a while. So anything that we determine to be significant in accordance with revenues, expenditures, assets, and liabilities, we're required to look at about every 3 years. This year, a little bit different because normally ASB and cash receipting would be significant systems, but we debate whether it's significant during a pandemic since there's not as many ASB activities and cash receipting activities going on. So normally you would see us kind of touch on those areas at least every couple of years in an audit, but during the pandemic, it just doesn't seem like the right use of our time to look at it since those areas, you know, aren't as high of risk during a remote atmosphere, working in a remote atmosphere. Financial statement audit wise, you know, we always look at financial condition every year, and that would be about the only trend that we do there. Besides, of course, we trend your financial statements, but your prior financial statement audit results don't necessarily have an effect on your current financial statement audit results. So that's the one audit that doesn't really carry over year after year necessarily, as opposed to like the accountability and federal grant compliance. They do. Each year it matters what happened in the preceding year. Does that answer your question, Foley?
Yes, I'm curious, does the board receive all that information, like what has been looked at and all that, or is that just part of what you guys do?
That's just part of what we do. I mean, you can go out and look at our accountability reports every year. They're out on our website, and you can see for accountability wise and the financial federal, you can see what federal programs we look at every year. Typically federal programs, it's going to be SPED, nutrition, Title I, and now we have the COVID grant. And then there's one other one I'm drawing a, sometimes there's I think it's a block community grant, but for school districts, normally it's nutrition and then SPED and Title I. It's usually cycling those through because those are so significant. So we tend to look at the same programs unless, like, case in point this year, you get that emergency relief fund, and then all of a sudden we have to look at that program because it's new. So federal grants, usually the same programs, but we could always get you that information. If you ever want it, it would not take us long to get that for you to say, here's what we've looked at every year for the past, usually it's easy for us to go back about 5 years. So if you ever want that, I have no problem gathering that for you and getting you that information, especially as it pertains to the accountability audit.
But there would be no extra cost to us, right?
No, absolutely no extra cost. No, the price we quote is the price we quote. I'm lucky enough to have admin time to help with things such as this, and I actually really enjoy doing that. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. I usually save this for the end of this presentation, but we don't want to be an agency that just comes in and gives you an opinion on your financial statements and writes recommendations. We want to be an agency that helps you serve your constituents in the most effective, efficient way possible. And one way we do that is by answering questions such as that at no additional cost. So if you ever have questions like that, please reach out to me. I'll definitely get that information for you.
Really appreciate that response. Thank you.
No problem. And then,
Alrighty. If there's no more questions, we'll move right along. An important part of our office is the continuous communication between our audit staff and yours. There are a number of ways that we strive to stay connected throughout the audit process, of which we have highlighted the key methods for you today. One of them would be the pre-audit meeting, which is something that you can request ahead of time, where we can share information that may be helpful for the upcoming audit with you, introduce our team, and ensure records are ready for our audit. We would also use that time to request a prepared by client, or as we call it, a PBC list, just to ensure that everything that we would need in the beginning of an audit, we would have those documents. Another way that we stay connected is through an engagement letter, and we have already provided that to the district. This letter confirms both management and auditor responsibilities, and of course, other engagement terms and limitations. Additionally, this letter also identifies the cost of the audit, estimated timeline for completion, and the expected communications. Another way that we stay connected is through risk assessments, where we meet with several members of management, as well as the governing body to conduct these risk assessments. These meetings are a very important tool for us to meet one-on-one and better understand your observation and any risks that we should be aware of for your district. one of the most important tools for keeping up to date are weekly audit status meetings. This is a reoccurring meeting with the audit liaison, typically to provide you with an overview of the audit. It also is a great opportunity to discuss what has been completed, what is still in process or hasn't been started, a way for us to provide a list of outstanding items and discuss any questions or concerns as they arise throughout the audit process. As we near the completion of the audit, we also request a signed management representation letter that confirms the representations made to us by the district. These representations are important to ensuring our audit considered all of the information and that no information was withheld from our staff to your knowledge. Lastly, we are committed to ensuring you have the opportunity to hear directly from us on the results of your audit. We will work with management to schedule an exit conference meeting and invite all governing body members to attend this meeting. And once again, if a quorum of governing body members plans to attend, the district is responsible for ensuring the Open Public Meeting Act requirements are satisfied. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it along to Evans to go over levels of reporting.
Good evening. So as we go through our audit, it's not uncommon that we will develop audit exceptions. This could be a deficiency in internal control. This might be an instance of non-compliance with an area that we're reviewing in the audit. It could be an error on the financial statements. It could just be an area where there's a best practice that we're aware of that we would like to pass on to the district. So we take all the exceptions that we gather during the audit and we basically categorize them into their findings, management letter, or exit items. And this is a hierarchy. So, excuse me, findings would be the most serious. Findings actually go into our audit report and you provide a formal written response to the findings, which also go in our audit report. Management letters are a step down in terms of how we view them in terms of seriousness. And so we formally communicate them in writing, but they don't go in our audit report. There's a very oblique reference in our audit report to the fact that a management letter exists, but that's all. And then the lowest level would be exit items. This would be areas of control deficiencies or minor noncompliance, things we don't think are really significant to the basic objectives of the audit, wouldn't affect the opinions that we give you at the end of the audit. And we do have dedicated people within the state who look at the issues that we develop by entity type. So we only have the perspective of our local team here and our experience with the various entities that we deal with. But these, in this instance, these people are dedicated to schools, or we could also be dealing with people dedicated to federal grants in this instance. They see these exceptions from all the districts across the state. So their objective is to try and ensure that we're as consistent as possible in how we categorize exceptions that we might come across. So we're not reporting the same thing in one school district as a finding and another school district as a management letter, for instance. I don't know that we'll ever be perfectly consistent in that, but having them step in and have that much broader perspective than we can provide really helps us achieve that objective of trying to be consistent in how we report exceptions. Any questions on that?
So I have a question. So my question is on materiality, because last year I know that there was a question about a contract and it was determined to be not material because of the price of the contract. So, you know, when you talk about findings, management letters, and exit items, at what point does it rise? Is there a dollar amount that rises to be a finding? Based on our budget per se? Is it a percentage of our, does the dollar amount have to be a percent of our budget, or how is it determined whether something is a finding or management letter, just based on materiality and the amount?
Alex, do you want to answer this?
Yeah, I can. So a little bit different depending on the audit. So financial statement, it's set by government auditing standards. So they require us to set a materiality. If something's over that materiality, if we determine that that misstatement is a result of a significant deficiency or material weakness, then we report a finding. That materiality level is 10% of total expenditures for the financial statement audit.
Okay.
Now, for the federal audit, we're required, the OMB dictates this, and they say if something is in non-compliance of 5%, so if something didn't work at 5%, then it's a significant deficiency finding. If it's 10%, then it's a material weakness finding. Or if we think it can lead to 5 or 10% too. So federal audits are interesting in that it's the only audit where we're required to test your controls. So there are situations where you can actually test somebody's controls and you didn't find any non-compliance, but if there aren't controls in place, basically locked into compliance, you can actually still get a finding because it could result in non-compliance. So that's one caveat with the federal audit. Accountability, since it is our office that makes those accountability standards, it is a judgment call. Typically, for a contract such as the one last year, we look at how much activity the district has engaged in the year and look at it as a percentage of that and just the amount too. So it's not just the dollar amount, but the number of contracts as well. So there's a lot that goes into that conversation. So there's not like a direct answer for that one. So one contract, 100,000 at one entity could be pretty significant if it's a small town or a small school district, whereas opposed to Kent School District, where you're operating on a $44 million budget or so, I think off the top of my head, that 100,000 contract isn't as significant. So we take all that into consideration when determining those levels. And the accountability is where it gets a little out of our hands at the local level and gets more into what we call program manager hands. So we have program managers, as Evans mentioned, across the state that look at all subject areas uniform, and they help us determine, based on what they're seeing elsewhere, what that level of reporting should be.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. So next is talking about the tracker. So this is a relatively new thing that the office has done. It's posted on our website. It's basically a database that's both internal and public facing. We've been doing it for a couple of years now. So usually when we have something new, we go out of our way to talk about it. So there's two kind of things that this does. One is it's accessible to the public only for major issues, only for findings. So it's an easy way for the constituents of the district to check and see how the district is responding to any audit findings they've had. The other thing is basically for you. So it helps you just keep track of these things. Sometimes when you have turnover, people leave, sometimes things kind of fall through the cracks, or just when you're trying to get ready for the audit, because we're always going to follow up on prior year exceptions, and it's a place you can go and kind of remind yourself, these were the prior year exceptions, and you can put in what you've done. We'll always look at it during our planning for the audit. It's a place where we can kind of go and see what you've done. It's part of our normal risk assessment, our normal planning processes. And it's just kind of a central clearinghouse for you where you can just keep track of it and make sure that that you're responding to our audit recommendations, timely and appropriately. So you access it actually through our website. You'd use your Secure Access Washington, your SAW account. And for you guys, I think would use that to upload your CFAs on the financial, for your financial statement people. I believe that's where you'd upload your CFAs for us. But you'd log into that, and then it will populate with the exceptions that we developed during the audit. And then you'd go in and put your responses, whatever it is you've done to address those exceptions.
So earlier, somebody had asked about, just past audits and information. So this is, Ben actually has access to this system because he's the one that submits financials to our office. He can also do help desk. He can go and get this information for you. It goes back to 2014. If you ever want to see all the audit issues that have been issued to Kent School District since 2014, that's a good place to go. Ben, you can always have me do that too, because I don't know how user-friendly that is to be able to extract that information and put it into a document. And I don't want you to take all day doing that. So if you want me to do that for you, I can gladly do that too and get you that document. But if that's ever something you want, just let me know.
Right. Yeah, definitely somewhere you could go and get a sense of at least the number and the severity, because it'll identify whether it's an X item or a management letter or a finding. You can kind of get a sense of the trend of what kind of exceptions are being developed. So next. So just a couple of miscellaneous things here, important information. One is confidential information, and we've been dealing with this forever and talking about this forever. But it's just kind of a reminder for you to help us out. Sometimes we'll request data from you that may include confidential information, excuse me, and we may not even realize it. You might just point it out to us and say, hey, do you guys really need to get this particular information? Oftentimes we wouldn't need it. We always flag confidential information in our work papers, so it's protected from the public records process. So if you just be our partner in that, I think we're pretty good at this. We've been doing this a long time, but just be our partner in this and just kind of help us out, make sure that we're always aware if we've asked for confidential sensitive information, so we can properly flag that. Next is audit costs. You should have in the packet on the entrance document that is part of that, the audit costs. It's also in the engagement letter. I'm just going through it right now. It looks like 80,000 is our estimated audit costs. It should be the same as last year. We budget internally in terms of hours, and then we have an hourly rate. So to you, it's dollars. Our hourly rate and our hours, I don't believe have changed from last year. Is that correct, Alex?
No, it changed. We had one less federal program. So I think it's, is it it would be 6,800, I think, cheaper than last year is what we have right now.
It went down. So that's
went down. Yeah, went down.
Right. Yeah, and that's just, we have no real control over how many federal programs have to be audited in any given year. We talked about that a little bit earlier. The feds just give us a formula. We just plug the numbers in for the expenditure of federal programs during the year into this formula, and it kicks out the answer in terms of which programs we have to audit. I think Alex mentioned earlier, there's a few programs that tend to get kicked out more often than others, but you never know exactly how that's going to shake out until we actually get your CFA and put it through the formula. Next, audit dispute process. So we do have a formal process for audit dispute resolution. I'd say that's last resort. Hopefully we'd never ever get there. Always, if you have any kind of concerns or problems or questions, work with us. I've been doing this a long time, and I can't think of, in my own career at least, any time where something came up in audit that we weren't able to work out. But just know that if for some reason we couldn't, there is this process that is available to you. The last is loss reporting. This is another thing that's been out there forever, but we always kind of take an opportunity to remind you, any known or suspected losses of public resources, just make sure you report them to our office in compliance with the RCW. Any questions on that?
What is the hourly rate, if you don't mind telling me?
It's
113. Sorry, Evans.
113 an hour.
Thank you.
All right. And that hasn't, it hasn't gone up in, 2 years now?
2 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And I would be shocked if it went up over the next biennium. I would be shocked. So hopefully it will stay that same rate. And as Evans alluded to, we're a little bit lower this year. So that just goes in hand to say, if we're not one of those contractors that's going to quote a price and just automatically come in at that price. If there's ways to save funds, we are definitely going to take that opportunity, especially in today's environment. I know we're all looking at that bottom dollar very closely right now, especially not knowing what kind of funding is going to come down the road later. So any way we can save you money, we'll definitely take that opportunity.
And on the flip side of that, it would be very unusual we would go over that cost. There would have to be something significant that came up during the audit that would cause that. And we would obviously immediately communicate to you if that situation came up, but it would be very unusual. A little bit earlier, Diana talked about that communication process. And that's critical to helping us stay out of that situation. When we do an audit, it requires a lot of cooperation from our auditee, from your staff. And the better we have that kind of communication ongoing during the audit, the more effective and efficient we're going to be at conducting the audit, And the more we're going to be able to head off any kind of issues where we might get in that situation. But I say it's very rare, and if it came up, we would absolutely discuss it. Next, who audits the auditor? So we actually do get audited, just like we audit you. There's a peer review program that all state auditors' offices belong to. So you can see the National State Auditors Association conducts it. Typically, it's every 3 years. That's the normal standard, but occasionally we'll get audited a little bit more frequently because of circumstances like for our peer review, our performance audit, excuse me. And you can see the link there. You can go and you can see our peer review audit report. We've passed our latest one, and as far as I know, we've always passed our audit reports. I can't think of one where we haven't passed, but you can definitely go out and see it. So just be assured that we also get audited, just to be fair. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it back to Alex to talk about the next slide, which is working together to improve government.
So I've alluded to this slide quite a bit through the presentation, and it's been brought up. So just a couple of services out there to help you. Local government support team. This is the team that runs that SAW account we talked about. They help with online filing. They do lots of trainings. They also have a help desk portal. So anytime you have a question, you can log into that account and ask a question, and it's a no additional cost to you throughout the year. And then you have documentation of our response to that question. So just a couple good services there. And the Center for Government Innovation, constantly coming out with good checklists, how-tos, especially things that are just coming up. So a lot of times you kind of catch yourself behind the 8 ball a little bit, where it's, you know, you're waiting for an audit to find something out. This is a good service of if you want to find out right away. So usually as things happen, this team is going to come out with best practices to address that. So this was the team for our office that came out with a lot of the CARES guidance. You know, that hierarchy. They came out with a hierarchy of this is what you want to do to document whether you think an expenditure is allowable, because there wasn't a lot of guidance out there. So this team had worked with the Department of Commerce and Department of Treasury to figure out some of those questions to get people on the right path, basically. So this is kind of the stuff they do. They also have stuff for board members as well, where, you know, they have OPMA checklists, executive session checklists. So if you're ever curious what the rules are associated with those are good guidance. Basically, I always end this with just saying, if you're talking about something as a management group or as a board, and you're curious what guidance is out there, if any, or if SAO has anything to say about it, reach out to us. You can just shoot me an email. I'll do that research for you. You don't even have to go to these teams. I'll even submit help desk questions on your behalf. I know how busy you are. I know that audits come in on top of your normal job duties. And it's not necessarily a part of your job duties that when, you know, you're assigned this, and that we're just a lot of extra work. So anything I can do to help, relieve some of that burden of going through an audit, we definitely want to do. And same thing with the board. If you're ever discussing something, you're like, hey, does SAO have any guidance on this? Or you know, we're talking about this at our next board meeting. Would you have any insight? Reach out to me. Happy to have those conversations. No additional cost to you throughout the year. Anything we can do to help you serve your constituents in a more effective and efficient way, we're all about it. We're all in this together. And I feel like we all got into government for the same reason, and it's to help the people around us. So anything we can do to help you with that, just let us know. And with that, my contact information is on this last page. Feel free to reach out to me at any time at all. Like I said, I set aside time every week to answer questions, mainly because it's my favorite thing to do with this job is talk to people, if you can't tell through this meeting, and do research. So anything I can do to help, or Diana or Evans, we're all about it. So any questions for us today?
Yes, I wanted to ask about the federal audits that you're doing. I'm familiar with the Title I, but can you talk about how you're going to be conducting this federal audit for ESSER funds? I know you talked about allowable uses, but beyond that, what else are you looking for, and what's the process look like?
That is an excellent question. Diana, have you had a chance to look at the compliance supplement to see what those do they have additional procedures already in there that we have to look at?
As far as I'm aware, we are required to look at allowable costs and cost principles. There are some where we still have to look at the grant agreement or perhaps the expenditure detail to determine if something is applicable for the district, if we have to further test it or not. So at the moment, we can't tell you exactly what would be the additional things, but there are a couple that we have to determine if they are applicable and if they are material.
Okay, and this is our first year auditing this. So right now, what we'll have to do, we always know activities allowed and allowable costs are part of that federal grant. It's really rare that that wouldn't be part of a federal grant. But we have to read the grant agreement to figure out what else is applicable to this program. So what we could do is once we get that grant agreement, we haven't started reviewing it yet, we could let Ben know and send him a list that says, hey, here's the compliance requirements that is associated with this grant. And then he could share it with you at your next board meeting if that works for you. I have the same question myself because I have not had a chance to look at it yet. And I know it's almost frightening to see that it's already come around to audit it because I know there's not a lot of guidance out there on it. So hopefully what I've been hoping all year, and this isn't just with school districts, but with cities as well, is that the federal government recognizes that this was all happened at once and they'll be a little bit more lenient on the requirements, maybe the first year as opposed to other federal programs. However, that's all speculation, so it's just wishful thinking on my part, I think. But we'll definitely let you know as soon as we find out what those requirements are.
Actually, Alex, I can give you a little bit more information on that. I'm looking at our program right now on it. I mentioned earlier we have specialists to help with how we categorize exceptions. Also, we're fortunate that they are also provide us sometimes information about what we need to audit for federal programs. Our school specialists, they're more familiar with these programs than we are. So for all federal grants, there's maybe 9 or 10 broad compliance areas that we could possibly look at. And then depending on the particular grant, it just may not be applicable. Even if it's applicable, it may not be what we call direct and material, meaning that there's just no activity in that particular area. So for this particular grant, activities allowed and unallowed and cost principles, those two go together. And those are every grant. And that's basically just, did you spend the money for what you were supposed to spend for? I used the example, activities allowed. Maybe I used the example of a Meals on Wheels. I should come up with a school district example. There's a program where you could, people could deliver meals to shut-ins. And so maybe it's allowable to buy a car to do that. And then cost principles say, well, you can't buy a Lamborghini to do that. So give you an idea of kind of the two distinctions between activities and cost principles. But we always look at that every grant. We're looking at this grant too. We'll also be looking at cash management, which basically means, when the money's coming in versus when the money's going out, just to make sure that you're not getting money and holding on to it for long periods of time and making a lot of interest on it. And then the only other area for this grant is equipment and real property. And that is just dependent on what you did with the grant. So if there wasn't any purchases of equipment, it wouldn't, even though it's applicable, it wouldn't be what we call direct material, and we wouldn't look at it. So for this grant, for this year at least, and Alex had mentioned it's kind of a new thing and we're still all kind of learning about it, but there's only really 3 areas that we look at, that we potentially look at, and depending on how you spent the grant, maybe only 2. But the activities allowed and cost principles, that's really the big one. And that's where we're basically, was the grant properly spent? So the rest of them are somewhat technical sometimes, but that'll be the majority of our effort on that grant was it properly spent? I know there was some maybe lack of clarity and guidance exactly how some of that money was supposed to be spent. So we'll see how that all sounds.
Thanks, Evans. I'm glad you looked at that. So in comparison, if you want to know like other programs, typically there's 6 compliance requirements, and the federal government realized about 1.5 years ago that they were probably putting too much on the auditors. We used to have up to like 9 compliance requirements sometimes for like Title I. They limited it to, the federal government came down and said, let's limit it to the 6 that we think are most important. So like Department of Agriculture determined for nutrition that this is the 6 that we find most important. Title I, so the Department of Education came in and said, here's the 6 that we think are most important. So that's dictated by the federal agency passing on those dollars. So I'm glad to hear that there's only 3, because that right away in my head says maybe there's some cost savings there. So that's always our goal, and that's the way we always think is, oh, great, so it's about half the amount of the other grants. So hopefully we can get done under budget, but that's not always the case because sometimes these new ones are just a mystery and you have a little bit more research involved. But Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions while we have everybody?
I think my question was about, we talked, because I've been, since I got on the board, I've been pushing for this, as you know, because I've emailed you about making sure we do have this audit entrance, and I've been pretty persistent about that. So when we do risk assessments, and you said you're going to be meeting with the governing body, so does that mean you meet with each of the board directors individually, or how does that work?
We usually leave it up to the board to decide one person. So Diana, who did we meet with this time? Did we meet with somebody from the board?
Yes, I believe it was Denise.
So usually we let the board decide who we want to speak with. However, that being said, if another board member ever wants to talk to us and do a risk assessment, just reach out to us. We have no problem having that risk assessment and sitting down with you. That's not a problem at all. Typically, it's just, we usually would do it with our liaison, in this case, Ben, the superintendent, Dr. Watts there, and then the board would just decide somebody at that point to go with. But the more the merrier. If you want us to talk, if you want to talk to us, please reach out to us. We'll definitely have that conversation.
Okay, because the board didn't decide. I mean, the board hasn't had that conversation and decided who would go in for that risk assessment, just so you're aware.
Well, it's typically been the board president. That's what has always happened. So now it could be changed, but that is the way that it's happened at least since I've been on the board and before.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a management decision to do that. And so that's why we haven't stepped in, and it's not our place to say, hey, this board member, or make sure you talk about it as a board. That's complete management decision, and we have to be really careful as your independent objective auditor. We can't have any involvement in management decisions at all of the district, because then that affects our independence. So, but yeah, if you want to have a separate one, we absolutely can. Yeah, it's not a problem at all.
Great.
Yes, and I appreciate that you've always extended that, that all board members can reach out to you and meet with you at any time. So that has been communicated in the past as well to board members.
And it doesn't even have to wait till the audit. If you have something you want to talk to me about, I'm so afraid of mispronouncing your last name, Michelle. So I'm going to avoid. How do you pronounce it?
Bettinger. I know. Vengadasala. I'm not going to say Bettinger. It's a soft G. It's a soft G.
Yeah, I'm always I feel so bad. My last name's a mouthful as well. So as Bettinger, as Director Bettinger had reached out to me earlier, and I answered that email. Anytime you want to talk about something, I'm all for it. I'm definitely, I think the more open we are and transparent and having conversations and getting questions answered, I think it just helps the audit process and helps develop our relationship as an auditor and a client. So anytime I can answer any questions, you feel free to reach out to me.
Great. Thank you.
I can tell you that it hasn't been always the case with our auditors in previous years. So I really appreciate the way you've extended yourself and reached out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean it when I say, I feel like we all got into government to help, help all of us, right? That's what we're doing here. So that's kind of the philosophy I take to my everyday work. So I appreciate that.
I may make just a quick comment on this also. We do our audits under what we call a risk-based approach. So we don't have time to look at everything we might look at in any given audit. So up front, we try and assess risks and decide in any particular audit where we should go. But we will take information to help us better assess risk from any quarter at any time. From any source. We get information from citizens who will contact us through our hotline. Anyone at the district and the board or employees can always reach out to us. We can't get too much information to help us do a better job of assessing risks.
Yep. It's your audit, you're paying for it, especially on that accountability audit. There's certain things we have to look at, but if you gave me a list of 100 things to look at, I would definitely start just incorporating a couple every year until we get done with the list. So that's just kind of the way we approach it. So.
Great. Thank you.
Anything else tonight? Ms. Bettinger, would you like us to reach out to you to schedule a meeting, or do you want to reach out to me? If you want to,
yes, I would like a meeting.
If you want to shoot me an email with some times that work for you, I'll let you know and we'll set up a meeting.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Alrighty. Anything else tonight?
I just have a comment. I want to echo your enthusiasm. It comes across in a virtual meeting, and it's so pleasant to get on a Zoom meeting and have people be excited and willing to help and willing to. That's a great attitude and a great partnership, and I appreciate that very much tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the compliment. So,
All of you.
yeah, we love what we do. So, perfect. I think that's all we have for you tonight. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for having this entrance in an open public meeting. I think it was very useful to have. I just think it helps us start on the right foot.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and effort. So we look forward to hearing from you as you work through it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Alex.
Good night.
Our session is now adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Have a
Thank
good night,
you.
everyone.
Take care. Be safe.
Okay.
Bye-bye.